I never expected to be deliberately excluded from my family's annual reunion, especially after I'd spent years financially supporting my brother's struggling business. But when my grandfather's inheritance was announced at the very gathering I wasn't invited to, I discovered something that changed everything. The family that had taken my generosity for granted now wanted me to pretend nothing had happened, but I had finally learned what my worth truly was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rebecca Mitchell, and until last year, I believed family meant unconditional support, no matter the personal cost. Growing up in Oak Ridge, a small town where everyone knew each other's business, family reputation meant everything. My parents, Thomas and Eleanor Mitchell, raised my older brother James and me with the mantra, "Mitchells support Mitchells, no questions asked." Our extended family was equally tight-knit. Every summer since before I was born, my grandfather, Walter, hosted the Mitchell family reunion at his sprawling lakeside property. These gatherings were legendary. 3 days of barbecues, swimming, campfire stories, and the infamous Mitchell family softball game. Attendance wasn't merely expected, it was practically mandatory. My grandfather would oversee everything from his favorite wicker chair on the porch, his weathered face beaming with pride as he watched his legacy gather around him. "Family is the only investment that truly matters," Grandpa Walter would declare, raising his glass during the traditional reunion toast. As a child, I'd nod along, absorbing this wisdom without question. As an adult, I would learn just how expensive that investment could become. After college, while James took over our father's insurance agency, I pursued my passion for software development. I moved to the city, secured a position with a promising tech startup, and began building my career. The hours were long, the pressure intense, but I thrived on the challenges. Within 5 years, I had worked my way up to senior developer with stock options and a salary that allowed me comfortable financial freedom for the first time in my life. I still returned to Oak Ridge monthly to visit my parents and made it a point never to miss family gatherings, especially the sacred summer reunion. Distance hadn't diminished my commitment to the Mitchell family values. Everything changed when the economic downturn hit Oak Ridge particularly hard. Dad's health was declining, making it difficult for him to fully support Mom. Meanwhile, James's insurance agency began struggling as local businesses closed and policies lapsed. His wife, Allison, had left her teaching job to care for their twins, Emma and Ethan, then just 4 years old. Their financial situation deteriorated rapidly. "It's just temporary," James assured me over coffee during one of my monthly visits. His smile couldn't hide the shadows under his eyes. "The market will bounce back. It always does." But weeks turned into months, and instead of improving, things got worse. One Tuesday evening, my phone rang just as I was leaving the office. "Becca," James's voice cracked. "The bank. They're threatening foreclosure on the agency if I can't make the mortgage payment by Friday." My stomach dropped. The agency had been in our family for 3 generations. Dad had built it into what it was, and the thought of it being lost under James's watch would devastate our father, whose heart condition had already landed him in the hospital twice that year. "How much do you need?" I asked without hesitation. The amount he named would drain nearly half my emergency savings, but I transferred the money that night. My brother's relief was palpable. "You're a lifesaver, Becca. I'll pay you back as soon as things stabilize. I promise." I believed him completely. After all, Mitchells support Mitchells. That first loan began a pattern that would define the next 2 years of our relationship. Each month seemed to bring a new crisis: property taxes, insurance premiums, the twins' school tuition, medical bills when Allison developed complications from a routine procedure. Each time, James would call with the same mix of shame and desperation. Each time I would transfer the funds without question. Our parents remained largely unaware of the extent of James's financial troubles or my assistance. "Your brother is having a bit of a rough patch, but he's managing," Mom would say during our calls. I never contradicted this version of reality, sensing that James had minimized the situation to protect them from worry. During weekend visits to Oak Ridge, I would often take Emma and Ethan for Aunt Becca days, trips to the museum, the zoo, or simply ice cream downtown. What my brother didn't know was that I had opened college savings accounts for both children, contributing monthly from my own salary. The thought of their opportunities being limited by their parents' financial struggles was unacceptable to me. "You spoil them," Allison would comment when I brought the twins home with new books or art supplies. "That's what aunts are for," I'd respond lightly, never mentioning the thousands of dollars I'd funneled into their household over the months, or the promotions I'd declined that would have required more travel and made me less available to help. As my own savings dwindled, I began making smaller sacrifices that accumulated over time. I moved to a less expensive apartment further from the office, adding 40 minutes to my daily commute. I canceled my gym membership, opting for running in the park instead. Vacations became staycations. Designer coffee became home-brewed. None of these changes were devastating in isolation, but together they represented a significant downgrade in my quality of life. Still, family came first. Mitchells support Mitchells. The Mitchell family reunion arrived that summer as it always had. I spent more than I should have on gifts for the family, particularly for Emma and Ethan, who had grown so much since the previous year. Grandpa Walter, now approaching 90 but still sharp as ever, held court from his wicker chair, dispensing wisdom and occasional judgment in equal measure. "Rebecca," he beckoned to me on the second evening as I passed by with a plate of barbecue. "Sit with me a while." I settled into the chair beside him, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of orange and pink. "Your brother tells me you've been helping him out," Grandpa said, his eyes still fixed on the horizon. I shifted uncomfortably. "Just until things improve." Grandpa's weathered hand patted mine. "You've always been the responsible one. Even as a child, you were the one who saved your allowance while James spent his before he got home." He chuckled at the memory. "But remember something important, Becca. Generosity is a virtue only when it doesn't diminish the giver." His words stayed with me long after the reunion ended and I returned to the city. Had my generosity begun to diminish me? I pushed the thought away. Family transcended such selfish considerations. 2 weeks later, James called again. This time, he needed help with the twins' school tuition for the upcoming year, a sum that would completely deplete what remained of my emergency fund. For the first time, I hesitated. "James, I'm not sure I can manage that amount right now." "What do you mean?" The surprise in his voice was genuine. "You've never had a problem before. You're still at the same company, right?" "Yes, but I've been helping you for almost 2 years now. My savings are nearly gone." There was a long pause before he responded, his tone noticeably cooler. "I see. Well, if you can't help your own family, I guess we'll just have to figure something out. The twins will be disappointed, of course." The emotional manipulation was so transparent it should have angered me, but instead, it triggered the familiar guilt. By the end of the call, I had agreed to make the payment, promising myself it would be the last time, a promise I had made and broken several times before. That night, I created a spreadsheet detailing every dollar I had given to James over the past 22 months. The total shocked me into sleeplessness. It wasn't just the amount, though that was substantial enough to have been a down payment on a house, but the realization that there had been no movement toward independence on James's part, no gradual reduction in his need for my assistance. As I stared at the ceiling, Grandpa Walter's words echoed in my mind. Generosity is a virtue only when it doesn't diminish the giver. For the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge that I had been diminished, financially, emotionally, and in ways I hadn't yet fully recognized. What had started as emergency assistance had evolved into something unhealthy for both of us. I was enabling dependence rather than supporting independence. The next morning, I made a decision that would ultimately transform not just my financial reality, but my understanding of what family truly means. It was time to redefine what Mitchell's support Mitchells meant for me, before there was nothing left of me to give. The morning after my sleepless night of financial reckoning, I arrived. At work earlier than usual. The office was quiet, with only the gentle hum of computers and the occasional ping of early emails breaking the silence. I sat at my desk, opened a new document, and began drafting what I called my financial independence plan. This wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming my autonomy and redefining my boundaries. The first item on my plan was the hardest. I needed to have an honest conversation with James about our current arrangement. For 2 years, I had avoided confrontation, choosing instead to quietly deplete my savings rather than risk family discord. That approach had led me to financial vulnerability and emotional resentment, neither of which served anyone, least of all James. I was organizing my thoughts when my manager, Sophia, stopped by my desk. "Rebecca, do you have a minute?" She gestured toward one of the small conference rooms. Once inside, she closed the door and turned to me with an unexpected smile. "I wanted to speak with you first before making the announcement. The Seattle project lead position is opening up, and the executive team wants you for it." My heart raced. The Seattle project was the company's most ambitious initiative to date, a collaboration with a major tech giant that would significantly raise our profile in the industry. Leading it would mean a substantial promotion, salary increase, and equity adjustment. "That's incredible," I managed, already calculating how this opportunity could accelerate my financial recovery. "There's on consideration," Sophia continued. "It would require relocation to Seattle for at least 18 months. We'd need you to start in 3 weeks." The excitement that had momentarily lifted my spirits now collided with the reality of my family obligations. 3 weeks. The twins' school year was starting. James was counting on my help. My parents would be disappointed to have me move farther away, especially with Dad's health concerns. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Can I have a few days to think about it?" I asked. Sophia nodded. "Of course. But we'll need your decision by Monday." For the rest of the day, I moved through my tasks in a fog of conflicting thoughts. The Seattle position represented everything I had worked toward professionally: recognition, advancement, financial security. But accepting it would mean fundamentally restructuring my role in my family's life. Could I do that? More importantly, should I? That evening, instead of calling James immediately as my instincts urged, I reached out to someone I knew would offer perspective untainted by family dynamics: my college roommate, Diana. Over video chat, I laid out my situation without minimizing either the opportunity or my concerns. "Let me get this straight," Diana said after listening patiently. "You've given your brother almost enough money to buy a house. You've put your own financial future at risk. You've turned down previous growth opportunities to stay available for his family. And now you're considering declining a dream position because it might inconvenience him?" Put so bluntly, the imbalance in my relationship with James was impossible to ignore. "When you say it like that," I began. "I'm saying it exactly like it is," Diana interrupted. "Becca, I've known you for 15 years. You're brilliant, hardworking, and compassionate to a fault. But right now, you're being taken advantage of, and it's preventing you from living your own life." Her words stung because they contained the truth I had been avoiding. "But family comes first," I said automatically, reciting the Mitchell mantra. "Does it?" Diana challenged. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like James comes first. Your parents come first. The twins come first. Everyone except you. That's not family coming first. That's you coming last. We talked for another hour, and with each minute, I felt something shifting inside me, like tectonic plates realigning after years of pressure. By the time we ended the call, I had clarity about my next steps. The following evening, I drove to Oak Ridge after work, having texted James that I needed to discuss something important. He seemed surprised when I declined his suggestion to meet at his house, requesting instead that we meet at the small coffee shop downtown, where we'd be free from interruptions or little ears. James arrived looking harried, checking his watch, as he slid into the booth across from me. I can only stay for about 30 minutes. Allison has a book club tonight, and I need to get back for the twins. I took a deep breath, centering myself. I've been offered a major promotion, I began, leading the Seattle project. His eyebrows rose slightly. That sounds impressive. More money, I'm guessing. Significantly more, I confirmed. But it would require me to relocate to Seattle for at least 18 months, starting in 3 weeks. James's expression shifted from mild interest to alarm. Seattle? You can't be serious. What about the twins' school year? And Dad's next cardiology appointment? And the roofing issue at my house that you said you'd help with? Each objection landed like a confirmation of Diana's assessment. Not a single word of congratulations. No recognition of what this opportunity meant for me professionally. Only concerns about how my absence would impact him. I've decided to accept the position, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. James stared at me for a moment before leaning forward, lowering his voice. Look, I understand wanting career advancement, but there will be other promotions that don't require moving away from family. This is just selfish timing. The word selfish hit me like a physical blow. After 2 years of financial sacrifice, after declining previous opportunities, after restructuring my entire life to accommodate his needs, I was being called selfish for finally prioritizing my own future. James, I said carefully, I've spent the last 2 years helping you financially. I've given you over $87,000. His eyes widened, then narrowed. I didn't realize you were keeping score. I wasn't, until I realized I was nearly broke from helping you. I pulled out the spreadsheet I had printed, sliding it across the table. These are all the transfers I've made to your account. My emergency fund is gone. My retirement contributions have been minimal. I moved to a smaller apartment and cut expenses everywhere possible to keep supporting you. James glanced at the paper, then pushed it back toward me. So you're throwing this in my face now? I thought family helped family without keeping ledgers. It's not about the ledger, James. It's about the pattern. I've been happy to help during a crisis, but after 2 years, it's not a crisis anymore. It's a lifestyle that's become dependent on my financial support. What exactly are you saying? His voice had taken on the defensive edge I had anticipated. I'm saying that I'm accepting the Seattle position, and I'm also saying that I can't continue providing financial support at the level I have been. I've created a 3-month transition plan. I pulled another document from my bag, where I'll gradually reduce my contributions, giving you time to adjust your budget or find additional income sources. James didn't even look at the plan. So you're abandoning us. Just like that. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm establishing boundaries that should have existed from the beginning. I tried to keep my voice gentle despite the frustration building inside me. This isn't healthy for either of us, James. You're capable and resourceful. You don't need to be dependent on your little sister. Easy for you to say from your fancy tech job. The bitterness in his tone was palpable. Some of us are trying to preserve Dad's legacy while raising a family in a struggling economy. I recognized the deflection tactic. The attempt to make me feel guilty for my career success while positioning himself as the noble family standard bearer. In the past, it would have worked. Today, I saw it for what it was. "I'm proud of your commitment to the agency and to your family," I said sincerely. "But my success doesn't diminish yours, and my boundaries don't mean I don't care. I'm still your sister, James. I still love you and the twins. That hasn't changed." For a brief moment, something vulnerable flashed across his face. Perhaps recognition of the truth in my words, or maybe just the realization that his usual tactics weren't working, but it quickly hardened into resentment. "Well, I hope Seattle is everything you're looking for," he said, standing abruptly. "Don't worry about us. We'll manage without your charity." He left without a proper goodbye. The bell above the coffee shop door jingling cheerfully in stark contrast to the heaviness in my heart. I sat there long after he'd gone, processing the conversation. It had gone largely as expected, though that didn't lessen the pain of his reaction. As I finally gathered my things to leave, my phone pinged with a message from Sophia. "Team is thrilled you're considering the Seattle role. Let me know your decision by Monday." I typed my response without hesitation. "I'm accepting the position. Thank you for this opportunity." Driving back to the city that night, I felt a complex mixture of emotions, guilt and grief intertwined with determination and a fragile sense of liberation. I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life, but the road ahead would not be easy. Family dynamics established over decades don't transform overnight, and I knew James's initial reaction wouldn't be his last word on the matter. What I didn't yet realize was how dramatically the family landscape would shift in the coming months, or how my decision that night would ripple through the Mitchell family in ways none of us could have anticipated. The journey toward healthy boundaries had just begun, and it would test every definition of family I had ever known. The 3 weeks between accepting the Seattle position and my scheduled departure passed in a whirlwind of preparations. During the day, I participated in transitional meetings, documented my current projects, and trained junior developers who would assume my responsibilities. Evenings and weekends were consumed with apartment hunting in Seattle, virtually with the help of a realtor, packing my belongings, and making arrangements to sublet my current place. Throughout this period, I received no communication from James. My calls to my parents were stilted affairs, filled with careful omissions about the rift with my brother. Mom would say, "James mentioned you're moving," or, "We're so proud of you, dear, though we'll miss having you closer," avoiding any direct reference to the financial situation or James's obvious displeasure. This strategic silence was typical of the Mitchell family approach to conflict. Ignore it publicly while processing it privately. The weekend before my departure, I drove to Oak Ridge for a farewell dinner with my parents. I had extended an invitation to James and his family, but received only a terse text in response. "Can't make it. Twins have a school thing." The transparency of the excuse, on a Saturday evening, was painful, but not surprising. Dinner with my parents was a mixture of genuine celebration and underlying tension. Dad, looking frailer than I remembered, but bright-eyed with pride, presented me with his father's pocket watch. "This was meant to go to the Mitchell who carried on the family business," he said, his voice trembling slightly as he placed the antique timepiece in my palm. "But I think it should go to the Mitchell who embodies the family spirit of determination and hard work." The gesture brought tears to my eyes. Despite the current strain with James, my father's acknowledgement validated my path in ways I hadn't realized I needed. As we lingered over dessert, Mom finally broached the subject we'd been delicately avoiding. "James tells us you've been helping him financially," she began, carefully stirring her coffee, though she took no sugar or cream. "I have been," I confirmed, maintaining neutral eye contact. But with my move to Seattle, that arrangement needed to change. Mom nodded slowly. "He mentioned something about that. He seems upset." I imagine he is, I replied. Change is difficult, especially when it affects finances. Dad cleared his throat. Your brother's had a tough run these past few years. The economy hit the agency hard. I recognized the subtle pressure in his words, the implicit suggestion that James's difficulties somehow obligated my continued assistance despite my relocation. In the past, I would have immediately reassured them, perhaps even promised to continue supporting James remotely. Tonight, I chose a different response. I know it's been challenging for him, I acknowledged. And I've been happy to help during this extended rough patch. But I've reached a point where I need to prioritize my own financial security. Of course, dear, Mom said quickly, though her expression suggested she didn't entirely agree. We just worry about the twins. Education costs are so much higher than when you and James were young. The mention of the twins was another calculated move, invoking the children's welfare to soften my resolve. I thought of the college funds I had established for Emma and Ethan, which neither James nor my parents knew about. Those would continue, regardless of my other financial boundaries with James. The twins will be fine, I assured her. James and Allison are capable parents who will figure this out, and I'll always be their aunt, even from Seattle. We managed to navigate the remainder of the evening without further tension, focusing instead on my new opportunity and Dad's upcoming fishing trip. As I hugged my parents goodbye, I felt both the weight of their unspoken concerns and a newfound lightness from having maintained my boundaries despite them. The drive back to my apartment that night gave me time to reflect on how fundamentally family dynamics were shifting because of my decision. For years, I had played a particular role: the reliable supporter, the problem solver, the financial safety net. By stepping out of that role, I had disrupted patterns established over decades, creating discomfort for everyone involved, including myself. Yet beneath that discomfort, I sensed the potential for healthier relationships, ones based on mutual respect rather than dependence and assumption. The transition would be difficult, perhaps even painful, but necessary for all of us. My first few weeks in Seattle were consumed with settling into my new role and apartment. The project was even more challenging than anticipated, requiring long hours and intense focus. But it was also exhilarating to work at the cutting edge of our industry, collaborating with brilliant minds on solutions that could potentially impact millions of users. My communications with family during this period were limited to brief calls with my parents and occasional texts with Allison about the twins. James remained silent. This absence hurt, but also provided space to establish my new life without the constant pull of family obligations. 6 weeks after my move, as autumn transformed Seattle's landscape into gold and crimson, I received an unexpected email from my grandfather. Such direct communication was unusual. Grandpa Walter typically relied on family gatherings or intermediaries to relay information. The message was characteristically brief. Rebecca, I'm updating some family matters and need your current address and banking details. Call me Sunday at 2 p.m. your time. Grandpa W. I complied with his request, sending my new information and making myself available for the appointed call. Grandpa Walter had never been one for small talk, and this conversation proved no exception. Rebecca, he began after the briefest of greetings, I understand you've been supporting your brother financially. The directness of his approach caught me off guard. Yes, I have been, for about 2 years. To what extent? His tone gave nothing away. I hesitated, wondering how much James had shared with him, then decided on complete transparency. Around $87,000 total, Grandpa. It started as emergency assistance during the downturn, but continued longer than I expected. There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of Grandpa's measured breathing. Finally, he spoke again. I see. And this support has now ended? It's being phased out, I explained. I created a 3-month transition plan to give James time to adjust. Because of your move to Seattle? Partly, I admitted, but also because it had become unsustainable for me financially and unhealthy for our relationship. Another weighty silence followed. I resisted the urge to fill it with justifications or explanations. "You've always been prudent," he finally said, his voice softening slightly. "Not just with money, but with judgment. Tell me something, Rebecca. Do you love your family?" The question seemed absurdly simplistic, yet I sensed a deeper purpose behind it. "Of course I do, Grandpa. That hasn't changed. And if James or your parents faced a genuine emergency, not just financial strain, but true crisis, would you help if you could?" Without hesitation, I answered truthfully. "Then you've understood what many never learn," he said cryptically. "Thank you for your time, Rebecca, and for your honesty." Before I could respond or ask what he meant, he ended the call. I stared at my phone, puzzled by the exchange, but somehow sensing its importance. Grandpa Walter had always been something of an enigma, stern yet fair, traditional yet occasionally surprising in his perspectives. His approval had never been easily won, making his subtle acknowledgement of my decisions all the more meaningful. The following week brought the first test of my new boundaries. My phone rang late one evening with James's number displayed on the screen. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. "James, how are you?" I kept my tone neutral but welcoming. "Not great, actually." His voice sounded strained. "The agency's furnace gave out completely. The replacement estimate is $4,200, and with winter coming, I can't expect clients to meet in a freezing office." My heart sank. This was exactly the type of unexpected expense I would have covered without question in the past. The timing, just as Seattle's first paycheck had substantially improved my financial situation, seemed almost choreographed. "That's a significant expense," I acknowledged. "What options have you explored?" "Options?" He sounded frustrated. "There's only one option. Replace the furnace before temperatures drop further. I thought maybe since you've gotten your big promotion." I took a deep breath. "James, I understand this is a genuine business need, but as I explained before I left, I'm no longer in a position to be your financial backup." "This isn't a luxury, Rebecca," he snapped. "This is basic business functionality." "I know," I said evenly. "Which is why business insurance or a small commercial loan would be appropriate solutions. Have you explored either?" The silence on the other end spoke volumes. He hadn't considered, or hadn't wanted to consider, alternatives to calling me. "So that's it?" he finally said. "After everything I've done for the family, keeping Dad's business going, staying in Oak Ridge to be near them while you built your career in the city?" I recognized the familiar pattern of his response. Positioning himself as the family martyr while implying my career success somehow came at the family's expense. In the past, this framing had effectively triggered my guilt. Today, I saw it more clearly. "James, I value everything you do for the family," I said sincerely. "Your choice to continue Dad's business legacy and remain in Oak Ridge is meaningful and important, but it was your choice, just as my career path was mine. Neither diminishes the other." "Easy to say from your fancy Seattle apartment," he muttered. "I worked hard for this opportunity," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the sting of his dismissal. "Just as you work hard for your agency. We've both made choices that align with our values and goals. And your values don't include helping family anymore." Message received. Before I could respond, he ended the call. I sat on my couch, phone still in hand, processing the interaction. The familiar guilt tugged at me, but alongside it was a new feeling, a quiet certainty that I had maintained an appropriate boundary despite the emotional pressure. I opened my laptop and navigated to the website for a regional bank in Oak Ridge. After a few minutes of research, I emailed James information about their small business improvement loans. with current rates and application procedures. It wasn't what he wanted, but it was genuine help that respected both his need and my boundaries. His response came the next morning, a terse thanks that acknowledged the information without conceding the larger point of contention between us. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was communication. For now, that would have to be enough. What I didn't realize then was that this small interaction was just the prelude to a much larger family reckoning. One that would begin with a simple email invitation and culminate in revelations that would transform our understanding of family legacy forever. April arrived in Seattle with a burst of cherry blossoms and increasingly frequent sunbreaks between the rain. I had settled into a comfortable rhythm after 6 months in my new position. The Seattle project was progressing well, earning recognition from both our client and industry peers. My financial situation had stabilized, allowing me to rebuild my emergency fund and resume proper retirement contributions. My relationship with James remained strained but civil. We communicated primarily about practical matters. He had secured a business improvement loan for the furnace replacement, and I had sent birthday gifts to the twins. Our conversations were brief and carefully polite, the underlying tension neither addressed nor resolved. It wasn't ideal, but it was manageable. My weekly calls with my parents followed a similar pattern. Mom would share local news and updates about Dad's health, carefully avoiding any mention of my financial boundaries with James. I would describe my work projects and Seattle discoveries, omitting the occasional loneliness I felt in my new city. These strategic omissions maintained a facade of normalcy that seemed to comfort us all. Then came the email that would disrupt this fragile equilibrium. It arrived on a Tuesday morning from my cousin Melissa, Grandpa Walter's designated coordinator for family gatherings. The subject line read, Annual Mitchell Family Reunion, June 11th, 13. I opened it expecting the usual details about accommodations and potluck assignments. Instead, I found myself staring at a message addressed to Mitchell, family members that outlined the upcoming reunion without any specific mention of my attendance. Puzzled, I scrolled through the recipient list. My name wasn't included. This had to be an oversight. Perhaps Melissa had used an outdated contact list that didn't include my new email address. I composed a quick response. Hi, Melissa. I noticed I wasn't on the recipient list for this year's reunion details. Could you please forward me the complete information? I'll make arrangements to fly in from Seattle. Thanks. Her reply came that evening. Hi, Rebecca. I'm so sorry for the confusion. Grandpa Walter asked me to coordinate a slightly different arrangement this year. He thought with your new position in Seattle, the travel might be burdensome. I should have reached out directly to explain. The carefully worded message didn't quite ring true. In all my 29 years, I had never known Grandpa Walter to excuse anyone from the reunion for convenience's sake. His philosophy had always been clear. Mitchell reunions were non-negotiable family obligations, regardless of distance or circumstance. I called my mother immediately. Mom, did you know I wasn't invited to the reunion this year? Her hesitation spoke volumes. Oh, Becca, I thought you knew. Grandpa Walter decided. Given the situation with James. What situation with James? I pressed, though I already suspected the answer. Well, dear, your brother is still quite hurt. About how things ended before you left. He mentioned to Grandpa that having you at the reunion might create tension that would affect everyone's enjoyment. The revelation hit me with unexpected force. Not only had I been deliberately excluded, but the exclusion had been orchestrated by my brother and sanctioned by my grandfather, the family patriarch whose approval had always mattered so deeply to me. And Grandpa agreed to this? I kept my voice steady despite the hurt building in my chest. Mom sighed. You know how he feels about family harmony at the reunions. He said perhaps a year apart would give both of you time to heal this rift. There wouldn't be a rift if James had accepted my financial boundaries like a reasonable adult, I pointed out, unable to completely contain my frustration. I know, dear, Mom said placatingly. But you know your brother. He takes things personally, and the past few months have been difficult for him. The business loan has higher interest than he expected, and Allison's hours at the school were reduced. I recognized the subtle pressure in her words, the implication that James's continued struggles somehow invalidated my decision to establish boundaries. In the past, this approach would have triggered immediate guilt and offers of assistance. Today, it sparked a different response. Mom, I'm sorry James is facing challenges, but that doesn't justify excluding me from a family gathering that's been part of my life since birth. I know, sweetheart. Your father and I told Grandpa we thought it was unnecessary, but you know how he is once he's made up his mind. After ending the call, I sat at my kitchen counter, processing this new development. The exclusion stung on multiple levels. Being uninvited to an event I had never missed felt like a formal declaration that my place in the family had somehow been diminished. That this decision had been made based on James's discomfort, without anyone consulting me or considering my perspective, added insult to injury. For a moment, I considered calling Grandpa Walter directly to appeal the decision. As his granddaughter, surely I had the right to at least discuss being excluded from a family tradition, but something held me back. Perhaps it was pride, or perhaps a growing recognition that this situation revealed important truths about family dynamics I needed to understand. The following morning, I received a text from my cousin Daniel, Aunt Patricia's son. Just heard about the reunion situation. Complete BS. You stood your ground with James and now they're punishing you? Uncle Walter's playing favorites again. Daniel's message brought both comfort and clarity. I wasn't the only one who saw the exclusion as fundamentally unfair. Additionally, his reference to Grandpa playing favorites again reminded me this wasn't the first time family members had been treated inconsistently based on adherence to unspoken expectations. Over the next few days, I heard from several other cousins expressing similar sentiments. Each message reinforced what I was slowly coming to understand. The exclusion wasn't really about family harmony at all. It was about maintaining established power dynamics and enforcing unwritten family rules, particularly the one I had violated by establishing financial boundaries with James. 2 weeks later, as I was finalizing a particularly challenging code implementation for our project, my phone lit up with a call from my father. This was unusual. Dad typically left phone conversations to Mom, preferring to add brief comments in the background rather than initiate calls himself. Dad, is everything okay? I answered, immediately concerned. Everything's fine, Becca, he assured me, though his voice carried an unusual tension. I'm calling about something specific. Your grandfather has scheduled a family financial meeting for the Saturday of the reunion weekend. He's insisting that all adult Mitchells attend, including you. The incongruity was striking. Let me understand this. I'm not welcome at the family reunion, but I'm required to attend a financial meeting the same weekend? Dad sighed. I know how it sounds, but your grandfather was very clear that this meeting concerns his estate planning and all adult family. Members need to be present. So I'm supposed to fly to Oak Ridge, attend this meeting, and then what? Sit alone in a hotel while everyone else enjoys the reunion? I know it's not ideal, Dad admitted. Your mother and I would be happy to spend time with you outside the reunion activities. The offer, though well-intentioned, only highlighted the absurdity of the situation. I was being asked to travel across states for a meeting, only to be formally excluded from family celebrations happening simultaneously. What exactly is this meeting about, Dad? Walter didn't share specifics, just that he's making some changes to his estate plans and wants everyone to understand his decisions directly. After promising to consider the request, I ended the call and opened my laptop. Within minutes, I had found several flights to Oak Ridge for that weekend. none of them particularly convenient or affordable on such relatively short notice. The practical obstacles, however, seemed secondary to the principle at stake. That evening, I took a long walk along Seattle's waterfront, watching ferries cross the Sound against the backdrop of a spectacular sunset. The beauty of my new home contrasted sharply with the turmoil of my family situation, offering both perspective and clarity. By the time I returned to my apartment, I had reached a decision. I would attend the financial meeting as requested, not out of obligation or fear of consequences, but because I wanted to face this situation directly. If my family was comfortable excluding me from traditions while still expecting my participation, when financially convenient, I needed to see that dynamic clearly rather than avoiding it. I booked the least expensive flight option and reserved a room at the small hotel downtown, rather than staying with my parents as I normally would. Then I composed an email to Grandpa Walter, direct, respectful, and unambiguous. Grandpa, I've arranged to attend the family financial meeting as requested. I'll arrive Saturday morning and depart Sunday afternoon. While I respect your decision regarding the family reunion, I want to be clear that being excluded from a family tradition I've valued my entire life feels both hurtful and unjust, particularly as I wasn't consulted or given an opportunity to address any concerns directly. Nevertheless, I look forward to seeing you at the meeting. With love, Rebecca. His response came the following day, characteristically brief. Meeting at 2 p.m. sharp, my house. We'll speak then. As June approached, I found myself increasingly preoccupied with thoughts of the upcoming weekend. What exactly was Grandpa Walter planning to announce? Why insist on my presence while simultaneously supporting my exclusion from family celebrations? The contradiction suggested complexities I couldn't yet decipher. A week before the scheduled trip, I received an unexpected call from James. Seeing his name on my screen after months of minimal contact sent a surge of mixed emotions through me. James? Is everything okay? Everything's fine, he replied, his tone difficult to read. I'm calling about Grandpa's meeting next weekend. What about it? There was a brief hesitation before he continued. I think you should know that. He's been asking a lot of questions about our financial situation, specifically about how much you've helped me over the past few years. This revelation surprised me. What kind of questions? Detailed ones, amounts, dates, purposes. I tried to keep it general at first, but you know how he is when he wants specific information. I did indeed know. Grandpa Walter's persistence was legendary within the family. Did he explain why he was asking? No, James admitted, but it seemed important to him. And now with this meeting. He trailed off, leaving the implication hanging between us. You think it's related to his estate planning? I concluded. Don't you? Why else demand everyone's presence with such urgency? The question lingered in my mind long after we ended the call. While estate planning would explain the mandatory attendance, it didn't clarify why Grandpa had been investigating my financial support of James. Unless a possibility began forming in my mind, one that seemed simultaneously plausible and unsettling. What if Grandpa Walter's interest in my financial assistance to James wasn't merely informational? What if it somehow factored into his estate decisions? The prospect created complex emotions. On one hand, I had never supported James with any expectation of recognition or reward, financial or otherwise. On the other hand, if Grandpa was considering acknowledging that support in his estate planning, it would represent a significant validation of my contributions to the family. Contributions that had been recently dismissed and devalued through my exclusion from the reunion. As I packed for the trip to Oak Ridge, I reminded myself to approach the situation with an open mind. Whatever Grandpa Walter planned to announce, my response needed to reflect my values rather than react to others' expectations. The real test wouldn't be what happened at the meeting, but how I chose to handle it. With integrity, self-respect, and the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. The flight to Oak Ridge was turbulent, both literally and emotionally. As the small regional aircraft bounced through pockets of unstable air, I found my thoughts similarly unsettled, fluctuating between apprehension about the weekend ahead and determination to maintain my dignity regardless of what transpired. I had deliberately scheduled my arrival for Saturday morning, just hours before the mandatory family meeting. This timing would minimize awkward encounters with relatives attending the reunion, while ensuring I fulfilled my obligation to Grandpa, Walter. The strategy felt both necessary and profoundly sad, a reflection of how fundamentally my relationship with my family had changed in less than a year. After collecting my rental car, I drove directly to the small downtown hotel where I'd reserved a room. Oak Ridge looked exactly as it had when I left, the same storefronts lining Main Street, the same courthouse square with its century-old oak trees, the same familiar faces nodding in recognition as I passed. The unchanging nature of my hometown contrasted sharply with the dramatic shifts in my personal and professional life since leaving. As I checked into the hotel, the desk clerk, a former high school classmate, offered a smile of surprised recognition. "Rebecca Mitchell, I heard you'd moved to Seattle, in town for the big Mitchell reunion?" The innocent question stung more than anticipated. "Just here for a family meeting," I replied, keeping my tone neutral despite the discomfort. "Well, enjoy your stay," she said, handing me the room key. "Though it's funny seeing you at the hotel when your family's place is right in town." I managed a polite nod before heading to my room, her comment underscoring the strangeness of my current position, simultaneously insider and outsider in my own family. After settling in, I took a moment to center myself before the afternoon meeting. The professional successes I'd achieved in Seattle felt distant now, overshadowed by the family dynamics I was about to re-enter. Yet these achievements were real and substantial, tangible evidence of my capabilities and worth independent of family validation. At precisely 1:45 p.m., I parked in front of Grandpa Walter's Victorian home on Maple Street. Several familiar cars already lined the curb: my parents' sedan, James's SUV, Aunt Patricia's vintage Volvo. Taking a deep breath, I walked up the familiar path to the wraparound porch where I'd spent countless summer evenings throughout my childhood. Before I could knock, the door swung open to reveal my mother, her expression a complex mixture of happiness and concern. "Becca, you're here." She embraced me tightly, then stepped back to examine me. "Seattle agrees with you. You look wonderful." "Thanks, Mom," I replied, genuinely touched by her warmth despite the circumstances. "How's Dad?" "Good days and challenging days," she said, the family euphemism for his heart condition's unpredictable nature. "He's in the living room with everyone else. We've missed you, sweetheart." The sincerity in her voice made the reunion exclusion all the more bewildering. How could she miss me yet accept my deliberate exclusion from a family tradition? The contradiction epitomized the Mitchell family approach to conflict, acknowledging feelings while avoiding direct confrontation with their causes. As I entered the living room, conversations momentarily halted. My father rose immediately from his armchair, crossing the room to embrace me. "There's my girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion that suggested more complex feelings about the situation than he'd expressed during our phone calls. James sat on the sofa beside Allison, offering a tight nod but no verbal greeting. His body language, arms crossed, shoulders tense, broadcast his discomfort. Beside them, Emma and Ethan brightened at the sight of me, waving enthusiastically but remaining seated, sensing the adult tension in the room. Other family members offered varying degrees of welcome. Aunt Patricia embraced me warmly, while Uncle Robert gave a cordial handshake. My cousins Daniel and Melissa showed genuine pleasure at my arrival, reinforcing the complex allegiances that existed beneath the surface of our family unity. Conspicuously absent was Grandpa Walter himself. As if reading my thoughts, Aunt Patricia explained, "Walter's in his study with his attorney. They've been closeted in there all morning." This information added to the growing sense that today's meeting was indeed significant. Grandpa rarely consulted his lawyer in person, preferring to handle most matters by phone or email. At precisely 2 p.m., the study door opened and Grandpa Walter emerged, followed by Mr. Harrington, the family attorney who had handled Mitchell legal matters for over 30 years. Grandpa moved more slowly than I remembered, his tall frame slightly stooped with age, yet his presence commanded immediate attention as it always had. His gaze swept the room, pausing briefly as it reached me. No smile softened his features, but something in his eyes, a glint of approval perhaps, suggested emotions more complex than his stern expression revealed. "Everyone's here," he stated rather than asked, gesturing toward the dining room. "Let's proceed." We filed into the formal dining room, where the grand mahogany table, a fixture at every family holiday throughout my childhood, had been prepared, with folders at each place setting. I noted that the seating arrangement deliberately separated family units, preventing husband-wife or parent-child pairings. This was classic Grandpa Walter strategy, ensuring each person responded as an individual rather than as part of a subgroup. I found my name card between Cousin Daniel and Uncle Robert, directly across from James, whose discomfort seemed to intensify as we took our seats. Once everyone was settled, Grandpa Walter remained standing at the head of the table, his hands resting lightly on the polished wood surface. "I've called you here today to discuss matters of family legacy," he began without preamble. "At 91, I've outlived 2 wives and most of my contemporaries. I've had ample time to observe how the choices we make reveal our true character." His gaze moved deliberately around the table, making brief contact with each person present. "The Mitchell family has prospered through adherence to certain principles: hard work, integrity, and mutual support. These values built our insurance agency, acquired our properties, and established our reputation in this community." He paused, his expression grave. "They also determine how I've chosen to distribute my estate." A subtle tension rippled through the room. While Grandpa Walter had always lived comfortably, few outside his attorney knew the true extent of his wealth. Rumors within the family suggested significant real estate holdings beyond Oak Ridge and investments that had multiplied quietly over decades. "Please open your folders," he instructed. Inside mine was a single document, a summary sheet, detailing the overall structure of Grandpa's estate plan, without specific dollar amounts, but with percentage allocations clearly indicated. As I scanned the contents, one entry immediately caught my attention. "Rebecca Mitchell, 30% of total estate, for demonstrating the true meaning of family support while maintaining the integrity to establish necessary boundaries." My breath caught as I processed the implications. 30% represented the largest single allocation on the sheet. The justification was even more stunning. A direct acknowledgement and approval of both my financial assistance to James and my subsequent establishment of boundaries. Looking up, I met James's gaze across the table. The color had drained from his face as he stared at his own document. Beside him, Allison appeared similarly shocked. Grandpa Walter remained standing, his expression unreadable. "These allocations reflect my assessment of how each of you has embodied Mitchell family values. Some may find my decisions surprising. Others may disagree with my reasoning. All are entitled to their opinions, but this distribution will stand." He then addressed something I hadn't yet noticed further down the document. "Additionally, I've established a separate educational trust for all Mitchell descendants under the age of 25. This fund will operate independently of the main estate, ensuring that regardless of their parents' allocations, all young Mitchells will have equal access to educational opportunities." This provision visibly relieved several people around the table, including James, who had likely feared his reduced inheritance would impact Emma and Ethan's future education. Mr. Harrington stepped forward, explaining technical aspects of the estate plan and answering several clarifying questions from family members. Throughout this discussion, I remained silent, still processing the unexpected validation Grandpa Walter had chosen to give me, not just through the substantial inheritance, but through his explicit recognition of the principles behind my decisions. The formal portion of the meeting concluded, family members began dispersing into small conversation groups. I remained seated, unsure of the appropriate next step in this unusual situation. Before I could decide, Grandpa Walter approached, gesturing toward his study. "Rebecca, a word please." I followed him into the book-lined room that had always been his sanctuary, noting how his collection of nautical maps and historical photographs had grown since my last visit. He closed the door behind us, then settled into his leather chair, indicating I should take the seat opposite. "You're surprised," he stated, rather than asked. "Completely," I admitted. "I thought that I disapproved of your move to Seattle and your decision to stop financing your brother's lifestyle." He shook his head. "Quite the contrary." "But you excluded me from the reunion," I pointed out, unable to reconcile this apparent contradiction. Grandpa steepled his fingers, studying me over their tips. "Did I?" The question caught me off guard. "Melissa said you thought traveling from Seattle would be burdensome. Mom said you were concerned about tension with James." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "And you believed that I, who has required family attendance at reunions through blizzards, childbirths, and international work assignments, would suddenly excuse you for mere convenience?" Put that way, the explanation did seem implausible. "I assumed you were punishing me for creating conflict by standing up to James. An understandable assumption, given the Mitchell family's historical aversion to direct confrontation." He shifted slightly in his chair, wincing at what appeared to be arthritic discomfort. "But incorrect." "Then why was I excluded?" "You weren't excluded, Rebecca. You were tested." The statement hung in the air between us as I processed its implications. "You wanted to see if I would accept the exclusion without challenging it." He nodded. "For decades, I've watched Mitchell family members sacrifice their well-being, their ambitions, even their integrity to maintain a facade of harmony. Your father did it by abandoning his dreams of architectural design to take over the agency. When his brother, your Uncle Robert, proved unsuitable. Your mother did it by pretending not to notice when her sister appropriated family heirlooms that should have been equally divided. Each example illuminated patterns I had observed but never fully articulated. "And James?" I asked quietly. "Your brother," Grandpa said with a sigh, "has mastered the art of leveraging family loyalty for personal benefit. His talent lies not in business but in narrative, specifically in crafting a story where his choices are noble sacrifices rather than personal preferences, and where others' success becomes a form of betrayal to family." The assessment was harsh, but not inaccurate. James had indeed cultivated an identity as the family standard-bearer, positioning his decision to remain in Oak Ridge and continue the insurance agency as a selfless commitment to tradition rather than a choice aligned with his own desire for hometown status and recognition. "You've been the first in generations," Grandpa continued, "to establish boundaries without apology or subterfuge, to state clearly what you can and cannot give, and to hold that line despite considerable pressure. That kind of integrity deserves recognition and reward." His words offered validation I hadn't realized I needed, acknowledgement that maintaining boundaries wasn't selfishness, but a form of honesty that ultimately served everyone involved. "The reunion exclusion was deliberate," Grandpa confirmed, "but not as punishment. I needed to see whether you would abandon your hard-won boundaries at the first significant social consequence." "You didn't. You expressed your hurt clearly while still agreeing to attend the financial meeting as requested. That balance of honesty and responsibility confirmed what I needed to know." As our conversation concluded, Grandpa Walter rose slowly from his chair, extending his hand in a formal gesture that held surprising warmth. "You've grown into a woman of principle, Rebecca. Your inheritance reflects my recognition of that character. But more importantly, I hope it provides resources to continue building a life guided by both generosity and wisdom." The immediate hours following Grandpa Walter's startling revelation passed in a blur of conversations and reactions from family members. Some offered genuine congratulations, while others maintained a polite distance, clearly processing their own feelings about the inheritance distribution. I remained at the house longer than initially planned, speaking with relatives I hadn't seen since moving to Seattle and answering their questions about my new position. James and Allison left quickly after the meeting concluded, offering brief goodbyes and avoiding direct conversation with me. The twins, however, broke away from their parents to give me fierce hugs, extracting promises of video calls and potential summer visits to Seattle. Their genuine affection, untainted by adult complications, provided a moment of pure connection amid the day's emotional complexity. By early evening, only my parents and I remained with Grandpa Walter. As we sat in the living room with cups of coffee, Mom finally addressed the elephant in the room. "I had no idea you were planning this, Dad," she said to Grandpa, her tone carefully neutral. "It's quite unexpected." Grandpa Walter raised an eyebrow. "Is it? Rebecca demonstrated extraordinary generosity toward your son for years, with minimal recognition or appreciation. Such character deserves acknowledgement." Dad shifted uncomfortably. "We're concerned about James's reaction. This could deepen the rift between them." "Any rift that exists," Grandpa replied firmly, "resulted from James's inability to respect Rebecca's boundaries, not from her establishment of them. If this inheritance creates further discord, it merely reveals what already exists beneath the surface." His directness silenced further commentary from my parents. Shortly afterward, citing fatigue, Grandpa excused himself to rest before the evening reunion activities from which I remained excluded. This created an awkward moment as my parents clearly felt torn between accompanying me and attending the family gathering. "You should go to the reunion," I told them, relieving them of the decision. "I have some work to review at the hotel anyway." Mom squeezed my hand. "We'll see you for breakfast tomorrow before your flight?" I agreed, though part of me wondered whether James's reaction to the inheritance announcement might influence even this simple plan. Back at my hotel room, I found myself too restless for work, despite my excuse to my parents. Instead, I took a long walk through downtown Oak Ridge, past familiar landmarks that now seemed to belong to a different chapter of my life. The experience was both melancholy and liberating. Acknowledgement that while this place had shaped me, it no longer defined me. Returning to my room, I found a text message from Cousin Daniel. "Reunion atmosphere is weird. Half the family talking about Walter's announcement, the other half pretending nothing happened. James left early with his family. Want to grab breakfast tomorrow instead of sitting through this charade?" His invitation offered both companionship and relief from potentially uncomfortable family dynamics. I accepted gratefully, then prepared for bed, my mind still processing the day's revelations. Sleep proved elusive as questions circled in my mind. Would the inheritance irreparably damage my relationship with James? Would family gatherings forever be divided into factions based on Grandpa's estate decisions? And perhaps most pressingly, was I prepared to accept such a significant inheritance, knowing the conflicts it might perpetuate? Morning brought some clarity along with Oak Ridge's characteristic misty dawn. Over breakfast with Daniel at the local diner, I gained valuable perspective from someone who had observed our family dynamics from a slightly removed position. "You know what's fascinating about all this?" Daniel said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "Everyone's acting shocked, but Uncle Walter has always been this way, evaluating people based on their actions rather than their narratives about themselves." "What do you mean?" I asked, curious about his perspective. Remember when Dad, your Uncle Robert, expected to inherit Grandpa's antique car collection because he constantly talked about preserving family heritage? But Grandpa left it to your father instead, because Dad never actually helped maintain the vehicles while your father spent weekends helping with restorations. The example perfectly illustrated Grandpa's consistent principle. Actions revealed character more reliably than words. The difference this time, Daniel continued, is the scale. This isn't about cars or furniture. It's about substantial assets. And it directly challenges the family mythology James has cultivated for years. The mythology that staying in Oak Ridge and running the agency is inherently more valuable than pursuing opportunities elsewhere, I suggested. Daniel nodded. Exactly. Grandpa just publicly declared that your support of family, even from a distance, even while pursuing your own career, demonstrated Mitchell values more authentically than James's performative hometown loyalty. This framing helped me understand both the inheritance and the family reactions more clearly. Grandpa Walter hadn't simply allocated assets. He had made a statement about values that directly contradicted long-established family narratives. As we finished breakfast, Daniel offered a final observation. You know, regardless of the money, the most valuable thing Grandpa gave you yesterday was permission to prioritize your own well-being without feeling like you're betraying family. That's something many Mitchells never receive. His insight resonated deeply. The inheritance represented financial security, certainly, but more importantly, it offered validation of my right to establish boundaries without sacrificing my place in the family. I returned to the hotel to complete checkout procedures, planning to meet my parents for a quick goodbye before heading to the airport. As I was loading my suitcase into the rental car, I was surprised to see James's SUV pull into the parking lot. He emerged alone, his expression unreadable as he approached. "Got a minute?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Of course," I replied, closing the car trunk and turning to face him directly. For several moments, he seemed to struggle for words, running a hand through his hair in a gesture reminiscent of our father when faced with difficult conversations. "I didn't handle things well yesterday," he finally said. "Walking out like that, it wasn't appropriate." The statement wasn't quite an apology, but from James, it represented significant effort. It was a lot to process, I acknowledged, offering the grace I hoped might facilitate genuine connection. He nodded, looking past me toward the mountains visible beyond the hotel. Grandpa's decision. It's his right, his money, his choice. Again, not quite acceptance, but movement from the immediate anger of yesterday. "I didn't know," I said, wanting to be clear about the inheritance, about any of it. I was as surprised as everyone else. "I believe you." His gaze returned to me, his expression softening slightly. "That's actually why I came. To say I know you didn't orchestrate this." The implication that such a suspicion had crossed his mind stung, but I focused on the positive aspect. He had moved past it. "Allison and I talked a lot last night," he continued, "about the past couple of years, about how things evolved between us." He hesitated, then added, "About how much you helped us when we needed it most." This acknowledgement, the first direct expression of gratitude I'd received from him in nearly 2 years of financial support, felt momentous. "The kids miss you," he said, shifting to safer emotional territory. "Emma especially. She keeps asking when you'll visit." "I miss them too," I replied honestly. "Seattle isn't that far. They could come for a weekend sometime, see the Space Needle, take the ferry." James nodded, considering. "Maybe this summer, once school's out." The offer represented tentative reconciliation. Not complete healing of our relationship, but an opening where before there had been only a wall of resentment. "You're still my sister," he said finally, the words simple but meaningful. Regardless of money or distance or disagreements, that doesn't change. As we parted with an awkward but genuine hug, I realized that Grandpa Walter's estate plan had accomplished something beyond wealth distribution. It had forced necessary conversations and recognitions that might otherwise have remained buried beneath layers of avoidance and resentment. My flight back to Seattle that afternoon gave me time to reflect on the weekend's revelations and their implications for my future. The inheritance would eventually provide significant financial freedom, but Grandpa's recognition of my boundaries had already delivered something equally valuable: validation of my right to define the terms of my family relationships. Upon landing, I sent a group text to my parents and James. Landed safely in Seattle. Thank you all for your time this weekend. My door is always open when you want to visit. Simple words, but they contained an important shift, an invitation. Offered freely rather than an obligation accepted reluctantly. That evening, as I stood on my apartment balcony watching the Seattle skyline illuminate against the darkening sky, my phone chimed with an unexpected email notification. The sender was Grandpa Walter, a rare occurrence as he typically avoided digital communication whenever possible. The message was characteristically concise. Rebecca, arrangements made with Harrington for you to receive initial distribution next month. Use it wisely. More valuable than money is knowing you've demonstrated the courage to live with both generosity and boundaries. The true Mitchell legacy isn't financial but moral, the willingness to support others without sacrificing yourself. You've honored this more than most. Grandpa W. His words crystallized what I had been gradually learning through my journey of establishing boundaries. True generosity flows from wholeness, not depletion. By reclaiming my right to financial autonomy, I hadn't abandoned family values. I had embraced them in their most sustainable form. The Seattle project would continue for another year, after which I would have significant professional and financial options. The inheritance would eventually expand those options further, but the most valuable outcome of the past year wasn't measured in dollars or career advancement. It was the discovery of my capacity to love my family deeply while still honoring my own needs and limitations. As lights twinkled across Elliott Bay, I made a silent promise to myself. Whatever wealth came my way, through work, inheritance, or opportunity, would be stewarded with the same principles Grandpa Walter had recognized in me. I would continue to support family when truly needed, establish clear boundaries where necessary, and find the wisdom to know the difference between enabling dependence and offering genuine help. The Mitchell family narrative was evolving, and I had played a role in that evolution, not by abandoning tradition, but by demonstrating that true family loyalty includes honesty about what we can and cannot give. In that honesty lies the foundation for relationships built on mutual respect rather than obligation or resentment. The inheritance wasn't merely financial capital, it was a vote of confidence in the path I had chosen, the path of authentic generosity balanced with necessary boundaries. And that validation, more than any monetary amount, represented the true wealth I carried forward into my future. 3 months after the revelatory weekend in Oak Ridge, Seattle greeted autumn with spectacular displays of color across its parks and a crispness in the air that energized the city. The initial distribution from Grandpa Walter's estate had arrived. As promised, deposited directly into a dedicated account I had established specifically for the inheritance. The amount, while only a portion of the eventual total, represented more money than I had ever possessed at one time. Following careful consideration and consultation with a financial advisor, I had developed a multi-tiered plan for these funds. A portion for long-term investment, another allocated for potential property purchase in Seattle's competitive market, and a smaller but significant amount designated for what I had come to think of as intentional generosity, support offered, from abundance rather than obligation. Professional developments paralleled these financial changes. The Seattle project was entering its final phases, consistently meeting or exceeding benchmarks. My role had expanded to include mentoring junior developers and presenting our innovations at industry conferences. These responsibilities had brought new challenges, but also deepened my sense of professional fulfillment. One Wednesday morning, I received an unexpected call from Melissa, Grandpa Walter's designated family coordinator. "Rebecca," she began without preamble, "Grandpa had a fall yesterday. Nothing catastrophic, no broken bones, but it's accelerated. Some conversations about his living arrangements." My stomach tightened with concern. At 91, even minor falls carried significant implications. "Is he in the hospital?" "He was overnight for observation, but he's home now with temporary in-home assistance. The doctor is recommending he not live alone anymore, which has created," she paused, searching for the right word, "family discussions." The careful phrasing suggested tensions I could easily imagine. Grandpa Walter's independence was legendary. He still drove himself to church every Sunday and maintained his extensive garden with minimal help. Any suggestion of reducing that autonomy would inevitably meet resistance. "What kind of discussions?" I asked, already anticipating the answer. "Your parents have offered to have him move in with them." James and Allison suggested converting their basement into an in-law suite. Aunt Patricia proposed a rotation system where he'd spend a few months with each family branch. Melissa sighed. "Everyone has an opinion, and no one's asking what Grandpa actually wants. Which is to stay in his own home, obviously. But with some health challenges emerging, that may not be realistic long-term without significant support." I considered this information, recognizing both the practical concerns and the emotional dynamics at play. Family members positioning themselves as Grandpa's primary caretakers might be motivated by genuine concern, but such arrangements could also influence inheritance distributions or create leverage in family power structures. "Has anyone suggested professional in-home care?" I asked. "Allowing him to stay in his house but with trained assistance?" "It's been mentioned," Melissa replied, "but dismissed as too expensive for anything beyond temporary help. No one wants to deplete his assets for care when family members are willing to provide it for free." The reasoning seemed sound on the surface, but I detected potential problems with this approach. Grandpa Walter valued his independence above almost everything else. Being dependent on family members, particularly those whose inheritance expectations might color their caregiving, could create complications that professional assistance would avoid. "What if cost weren't an issue?" I asked, an idea forming as I spoke. "What do you mean?" "I'd like to speak with Grandpa directly about this," I said. "Can you let him know I'll call this evening?" After ending the conversation with Melissa, I spent the afternoon researching high-quality in-home care services in Oak Ridge and surrounding areas. By the time I called Grandpa Walter that evening, I had compiled comprehensive information about options that would allow him to remain in his home with appropriate support. His voice sounded slightly weaker than I remembered, but lost none of its characteristic directness. "Rebecca, Melissa said you wanted to discuss my living situation." "Only if you're open to the conversation, Grandpa." "I'm open to solutions that don't involve being shuffled between relatives like a traveling exhibition," he replied dryly. I outlined the research I had conducted, explaining how professional care could be structured to preserve his independence while addressing medical concerns. The caregivers would assist only where needed, perhaps with driving, meal preparation, or medication management, while respecting your privacy and autonomy in all other areas. "Sounds reasonable," he acknowledged. "But as you likely heard, the family consensus is that such services are prohibitively expensive long-term." "That's actually why I'm calling," I said carefully. "I'd like to finance this care from my inheritance. Distribution." A long silence followed this offer. When Grandpa finally spoke, his tone carried a mix of surprise and curiosity. You'd allocate your inheritance to secure my independence rather than using it for your own benefit? I see it as aligned with the values you recognized in me, I explained. Supporting family in ways that preserve dignity rather than create dependency. Another thoughtful pause followed. You understand this could substantially reduce your total inheritance? If I live another decade with comprehensive care, the costs would be significant. I do understand that, I confirmed, and I've considered it carefully. My Seattle position provides financial stability independent of the inheritance. Using these funds to ensure your comfort and autonomy honors the principles that guided your estate planning decisions in the first place. Interesting proposition, he said, and I could almost see him stroking his chin as he considered the idea. Let me think about it. In the meantime, could you send me the specifics of the services you've researched? I emailed him detailed information that evening, including service descriptions, cost breakdowns, and potential schedules that would provide comprehensive care while maximizing his independence. The proposal represented a significant financial commitment, potentially reducing my inheritance by hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on how long Grandpa required care. Yet the decision felt unquestionably right, a way to use these resources that aligned perfectly with both his values and mine. 2 days later, my phone rang during my lunch break. Grandpa Walter's name appeared on the screen. I've reviewed your proposal, he said after brief pleasantries. It's thorough and addresses my primary concerns about privacy and autonomy. I'm glad it seems workable, I replied. Before making any decisions, I have a question, he continued. Why are you doing this, Rebecca? Truly? The directness of his inquiry required equally honest response. Because you taught me that, family. Support means honoring the whole person, not just addressing practical needs. Your desire to remain in your home isn't a preference to be overridden. It's central to your dignity and identity. And you're willing to finance this from your inheritance? Even knowing other family members might view this as unnecessary extravagance. I am, I confirmed. The inheritance is valuable to me, Grandpa, but your autonomy is priceless. And frankly, using these funds to secure your independence feels more meaningful than almost any other purpose I could imagine. His response was immediate and decisive. I'm accepting your offer, with one modification. The care costs will be divided, half from your inheritance, half from the general estate before final distributions. This represents fair recognition that your solution benefits everyone by resolving a family challenge. This compromise felt appropriate, acknowledging my contribution while ensuring I didn't bear the entire financial burden. That seems fair. I'll have Harrington draw up the necessary amendments to the estate plan immediately, he said. And Rebecca. Thank you. Not just for the financial support, but for recognizing what matters most to me. News of this arrangement spread quickly through the family network, generating a predictably mixed response. My parents expressed pride in my decision, while Aunt Patricia called to voice concerns about unnecessary expenditures reducing everyone's inheritance. James maintained public neutrality while privately sending a surprisingly supportive text. Grandpa seems genuinely relieved with this solution. Smart thinking, sis. 2 weeks later, professional caregivers began providing daily assistance to Grandpa Walter, while allowing him to remain in his beloved Victorian home. The arrangement immediately improved his mood and physical well-being, according to reports from my parents and cousins who visited regularly. The solution represented more than just logistics. It demonstrated an approach to family support fundamentally different from the dependency patterns I had experienced with James. This was assistance that empowered rather than diminished the recipient, respecting autonomy while addressing genuine needs. As October turned to November, I found myself reflecting on the remarkable transformation in my understanding of generosity. A year earlier, I had equated helping family with financial sacrifice, regardless of the impact on my own well-being. Now I recognize that true generosity required discernment, distinguishing between support that fostered independence and assistance that enabled dependency. This evolution was evident not just in major decisions like Grandpa's care arrangement, but in smaller interactions as well. When Emma and Ethan visited Seattle for a weekend in late autumn, their first trip without their parents, I created an experience that balanced enjoyment with education, taking them to museums and cultural sites alongside the Space Needle and Pike Place Market. Rather than simply indulging them with material gifts as I might have in the past, I opened modest investment accounts in their names, explaining basic financial principles in age-appropriate ways. "You're teaching us about money differently than Dad does," Ethan observed as we reviewed his account statement over hot chocolate at a waterfront cafe. "How so?" I asked, curious about his perspective. "Dad talks about money as something you either have or don't have," he replied thoughtfully. "You talk about it as something you learn to manage, whether you have a little or a lot." His insight struck me as remarkably perceptive for a 10-year-old, reflecting a shift in mindset I hoped would serve both twins better than the financial patterns they had observed in their home environment. My relationship with James had evolved, as well, developing a cautious cordiality that, while not matching our previous closeness, allowed for family interaction without tension. He had secured a small business loan to expand the insurance agency's services, demonstrating initiative rather than relying on family assistance. Whether this change stemmed from necessity after my boundaries or inspiration from Grandpa's estate, plan remained unclear, but the result was unquestionably positive. As Thanksgiving approached, Grandpa Walter surprised everyone by insisting on hosting the holiday at his home, despite his recent health challenges. With his care team's support and family members handling food preparation, the gathering became possible. The invitation list, sent via Melissa, included a note that made me smile. Full family attendance expected, no exceptions or exclusions this time. The invitation represented more than just holiday plans. It symbolized reintegration into family traditions I had valued throughout my life. Not through concession or compromise of my boundaries, but through mutual recognition of everyone's right to both autonomy and inclusion. As I booked my flight to Oak Ridge for Thanksgiving, I reflected on the journey of the past year. From financial depletion and emotional manipulation to boundary establishment and inheritance validation, each phase had contributed to a fundamental transformation in how I understood family obligation and personal fulfillment. The most profound change wasn't external but internal. The recognition that true family loyalty meant honoring both connection and individuality, support and boundaries, generosity and discernment. These weren't contradictory values but complementary ones, each strengthening rather than diminishing the other when held in proper balance. Grandpa Walter had recognized this truth long before I consciously articulated it. His inheritance distribution hadn't just validated my financial boundaries. It had affirmed a philosophy of family support, built on respect rather than obligation, empowerment rather than dependence. As Seattle's early winter rain tapped against my apartment windows, I finished preparations for the upcoming holiday travel. The year's journey had brought challenges and revelations I could never have anticipated, but had ultimately led to a place of greater wisdom and authenticity, a transformation worth far more than any inheritance could measure. Thanksgiving in Oak Ridge arrived with a light dusting of early snow that transformed the town into a scene worthy of a holiday postcard. As my rental car navigated the familiar streets toward Grandpa Walter's Victorian home, I felt a mixture of anticipation and residual apprehension. This would be my first full family gathering since the inheritance announcement and subsequent care arrangement, a test of whether our collective relationships had truly evolved or merely adopted a veneer of acceptance. The driveway was already lined with familiar vehicles when I arrived. I parked behind Aunt Patricia's Volvo and took a moment to center myself before gathering the pumpkin pies I'd baked that morning in my parents' kitchen. The familiar weight of family tradition, these pies following my grandmother's recipe, had been my contribution to Thanksgiving dinner since college, provided comforting continuity amid so much change. The front door opened before I reached it, revealing Emma and Ethan bundled in matching sweaters, their faces alight with excitement. "Aunt Rebecca!" they called in near unison, rushing down the porch steps to greet me. Their enthusiasm, untainted by adult complications, immediately dissolved my lingering tension. "We've been watching for you," Emma explained as she carefully relieved me of one pie. "Everyone's already here. Grandpa said we couldn't start the appetizers until you arrived," Ethan added, clearly communicating the severity of this delay. From a 10-year-old's perspective. Their chatter continued as we entered the house, the familiar sense of roasting turkey and sage stuffing enveloping us in holiday warmth. The living room buzzed with conversation that momentarily paused as I appeared in the doorway, then resumed with a wave of greetings that seemed genuinely welcoming rather than merely polite. Grandpa Walter sat in his customary armchair near the fireplace, looking stronger than I had anticipated given his recent health challenges. The professional care arrangement had clearly benefited him. His color was good, his posture more upright than during our summer meeting. When he caught my eye across the room, he offered a slight nod that conveyed more approval than any effusive greeting could have. James approached as I was arranging my pies on the dining room sideboard, his expression open and lacking the guardedness that had characterized our interactions since my boundary setting. "Good to see you, Becca," he said, using my childhood nickname for the first time in over a year. "How was the drive from Mom and Dad's?" "Quick and scenic with the snow," I replied, noting Allison's smile of greeting from across the room. "How have you all been?" "Good, actually," he said with surprising candor. "The agency's expansion is going well. We've added commercial property coverage that's attracting new business clients." "That's wonderful, James." My response was genuinely pleased rather than perfunctory. His success through his own initiative represented healthy independence that benefited everyone. The twins haven't stopped talking about their Seattle weekend. "Since they got back," he continued, "Ethan's been researching investment strategies. He's convinced his modest account will fund a tech startup by the time he's 18. We shared a laugh at his son's ambition, the moment of genuine connection feeling both ordinary and extraordinary given our recent history. "Listen," James said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "I wanted to thank you for the care arrangement for Grandpa. It was the right solution, and I don't think anyone else would have proposed it." The acknowledgement surprised me with its directness. "He values his independence above everything," I replied simply. It seemed important to honor that. "It was generous," James insisted. "Using your inheritance that way, I mean." "It felt like the right use of those resources," I said, "and Grandpa's compromise to split the costs was fair to everyone." James nodded slowly. "I've been thinking a lot about Grandpa's estate decisions, trying to understand his perspective rather than just reacting to it." He glanced toward the living room where Grandpa was now entertaining the younger cousins with what appeared to be a story from his naval service. "He's always been deliberate about aligning actions with values. I just didn't realize how carefully he was observing all of us." This reflection represented significant growth in James's perspective, a willingness to consider our grandfather's decisions on their merits rather than solely through the lens of personal impact. "We could probably all learn something from his approach," I suggested. "Definitely," James agreed. "And speaking of learning," he hesitated briefly, "I've been working with a financial advisor, getting our household budget properly structured, planning for the twins' education, that sort of thing." This voluntary disclosure about his financial management indicated both personal growth and a desire to demonstrate that growth to me specifically. Recognize the significance of this gesture, not just financial responsibility, but a tacit acknowledgement that his previous approach had been unsustainable. "That's excellent, James. A solid financial foundation makes everything else less stressful." Our conversation was interrupted by Mom's announcement that appetizers were finally being served, sending Ethan into visible relief as he darted toward the kitchen. James and I shared another laugh before joining the family migration toward the food. The meal that followed embodied the best elements of Mitchell family tradition. Grandpa Walter offering the blessing, platters passing around the extended table, conversations flowing freely between generations. I found myself engaged in discussions about Seattle's tech industry with Uncle Robert, the twins' school activities with Allison, and local Oak Ridge developments with cousin Melissa. What struck me most powerfully was the absence of underlying tension that had characterized previous gatherings. The inheritance decisions, rather than creating permanent divisions, seemed to have cleared the air in unexpected ways. Family members were relating more authentically, without the subtle manipulations and unspoken expectations that had previously colored interactions. After dessert, as smaller conversation groups formed throughout the house, Grandpa Walter beckoned me to join him on the enclosed back porch, where he often retreated for moments of quiet during large gatherings. A pair of comfortable chairs faced the snow-dusted garden, offering both privacy and a peaceful view. "You seem well, Grandpa," I observed as I settled into the chair beside him. "The care arrangement has been excellent," he acknowledged. "The right balance of assistance and independence. I'm glad it's working as intended." He turned slightly to study my face. "And you, Rebecca? How has this year of transformation been for you?" The question invited deeper reflection than casual holiday conversation typically allowed. "Clarifying," I answered after a thoughtful pause. "I've learned to distinguish between genuine support and enabling dependency, between family obligation and family connection." He nodded approvingly. "Important distinctions that many never ache." The inheritance announcement accelerated changes that were already underway, I continued. It forced conversations and recognitions that might otherwise have remained buried beneath family politeness. "That was intentional," he confirmed, surprising me with his candor. "Family systems resist change naturally. Sometimes they need a significant disruption to evolve." "Like excluding me from the reunion," I suggested, the event now appearing in a completely different light given subsequent developments. A smile touched his lips. "Precisely. Small adjustments are easily absorbed without fundamental change. Significant disruptions require genuine reconsideration of established patterns." His strategic approach to family dynamics revealed a depth of understanding I was only beginning to appreciate. Grandpa Walter hadn't simply been distributing assets based on personal preference. He had been deliberately creating conditions for healthier family functioning. "Your brother has shown remarkable growth these past months," he observed, glancing toward the living room where James was helping younger cousins set up a board game. Initially, he responded to the inheritance announcement with resentment, but he's gradually shifted toward reflection and adaptation. "I've noticed that as well," I agreed. "He seems more focused on building his business through his own initiative rather than seeking external support. A necessary development for his long-term well-being," Grandpa noted. "Dependency diminishes both recipient and provider over time. Independent capability benefits everyone." The simple statement crystallized what I had intuitively recognized, but hadn't fully articulated, that my financial boundaries with James had ultimately served his growth, rather than merely protecting my resources. "I've been considering an additional amendment to my estate plan," Grandpa continued, his tone shifting to something more deliberate. "Creating an educational foundation that would outlast my direct distributions." "What kind of foundation?" I asked, intrigued by this new direction. "One focused on financial literacy and entrepreneurship for young people in Oak Ridge," he explained. Our community offers limited exposure to business possibilities beyond traditional paths like the insurance agency. The concept immediately resonated with me, connecting to observations I'd made during my own youth in Oak Ridge. That could create tremendous opportunity for local students who might otherwise never consider certain career paths. My thought exactly, he confirmed. And I'd like you to serve as the Foundation's inaugural chairperson, if you're willing. The request caught me completely by surprise. Me? But I live in Seattle, and my expertise is in software development, not education or philanthropy. Your technical knowledge is valuable, certainly, he acknowledged. But more important is your demonstrated ability to balance generosity with discernment, precisely the perspective needed for effective philanthropic leadership. His confidence in my capabilities was both flattering and somewhat intimidating. I'd want to learn more about what would be involved, I said carefully. This would be new territory for me. Of course, he agreed. Harrington can provide the structural details. The foundation would be designed to function regardless of your geographic location, requiring quarterly meetings that could be conducted virtually if necessary. As we discussed the preliminary concept further, I recognized how this initiative aligned perfectly with the values Grandpa had consistently emphasized, creating opportunities for independence and growth rather than fostering dependency. The proposed foundation would extend these principles beyond family to benefit the broader community. Our conversation was eventually interrupted by the arrival of my parents, who joined us on the porch to enjoy the peaceful, snow-covered garden view. As discussion shifted to lighter topics, I found myself contemplating the extraordinary evolution of the past year, from financial depletion and emotional manipulation to boundary establishment and now potential philanthropic leadership. Each phase had required courage and clarity, often in the face of significant resistance. Had I capitulated to guilt or family pressure at any point, the transformation would have stalled, leaving unhealthy patterns intact. The journey reinforced what Grandpa Walter had recognized from the beginning, that standing firm in one's values ultimately serves everyone better than compromise born of obligation or fear. Later that evening, as family members began departing, with leftovers and warm goodbyes, I found myself alone in the kitchen with James as we helped with final cleanup. The comfortable silence between us as we stored containers and wiped counters represented its own form of reconciliation, not a return to previous patterns, but the establishment of a new, healthier connection. The twins and I were talking, James said as he dried the last serving platter. We'd like to visit Seattle again, maybe during their spring break, the three of us this time. The invitation represented another step in our evolving relationship, James initiating connection on new terms rather than from financial need. I'd love that, I replied sincerely. There's so much I didn't get to show them during their first visit. As I drove back to my parents' house that night, where I'd be staying until my return flight to Seattle, the snow-covered landscape gleamed under a full moon that transformed Oak Ridge into something magical and new. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. Familiar terrain viewed through transformed perspective, revealing beauty and possibility previously unrecognized. The inheritance that had initially seemed primarily financial had ultimately delivered something far more valuable, a pathway to authentic relationship with my family based on mutual respect rather than obligation or dependence. This was the true legacy Grandpa Walter had offered, one whose value far exceeded any monetary distribution. Spring arrived in Seattle with an explosion of cherry blossoms and new possibilities. The city seemed to mirror my own transformation, emerging from winter's contemplation into a season of growth and renewal. The Seattle project had concluded successfully, earning industry recognition and substantially enhancing my professional reputation. My role at the company had expanded accordingly, with a promotion to lead architecture strategist that brought both increased responsibility and compensation. The educational foundation Grandpa Walter had proposed at Thanksgiving was progressing from concept to reality. After several months of planning sessions with the family attorney and educational consultants, we had established clear parameters for the Walter Mitchell Foundation for Financial Empowerment. The mission, providing Oak Ridge youth with financial literacy education and entrepreneurial opportunities, had been refined through careful research into community needs and existing resources. My role as inaugural chairperson had initially seemed daunting, but I found myself drawing on unexpected skills from my technical background, systems thinking, strategic planning, and the ability to translate complex concepts into accessible frameworks. Monthly virtual meetings with the developing board, which included 2 local educators and a community banker, kept the initiative moving forward despite my physical distance from Oak Ridge. On a personal level, my relationship with James had continued its gradual healing. He and the twins had visited Seattle during their spring break as planned, creating new memories untainted by financial tension. James had surprised me with his genuine interest in the city's innovations and entrepreneurial culture, asking thoughtful questions about the tech industry that revealed a curiosity I hadn't previously recognized in him. "I've been thinking about diversification for the agency," he had explained, as we watched the twins explore an interactive exhibit at the Museum of Pop Culture. "The traditional insurance model is changing rapidly with online competitors. We need to evolve or risk becoming obsolete." This forward-thinking approach represented significant growth from his previous resistance to change, a willingness to adapt rather than merely preserve what had been established by previous generations. When I offered connections to several professionals in insurtech who might provide valuable perspective, he accepted eagerly rather than defensively. The most surprising development came on a Wednesday morning in late April, when I received an unexpected call from Sophia, my former manager who had since been promoted to Vice President of Innovation Strategy. "Rebecca, are you somewhere you can speak privately?" she asked after brief pleasantries. "I can be in 5 minutes," I replied, intrigued by her tone. "Everything okay?" "Better than okay. I need to discuss an opportunity with you, but it's confidential until officially announced." I quickly found an available conference room, curiosity mounting with each step. When I called back, Sophia wasted no time on preliminaries. "The company is establishing a new division focused on financial accessibility technologies, developing platforms that bring sophisticated financial tools to underserved populations. We want you to lead it." The announcement momentarily stunned me. "Lead it? As in?" "Division director," she confirmed. "You'd build your team from the ground up, establish the technical architecture, and guide product development. The position reports directly to the executive committee." The opportunity aligned perfectly with my professional strengths and emerging personal values around financial empowerment. Yet one detail concerned me. Would this require relocation? Back to headquarters? "Actually, no," Sophia replied, surprising me further. "The executive team has been impressed with the distributed team model you implemented for the Seattle project. They're open to establishing the division headquarters wherever its leader sees the greatest opportunity for innovation and talent acquisition." This flexibility represented a fundamental shift from traditional corporate structures and opened possibilities I hadn't considered viable. "I'd need time to think about this," I said, my mind already racing with implications. "Of course, Sophia." "Agreed. The formal offer will come tomorrow, but I wanted you to have advance notice. This is a significant opportunity, Rebecca. The kind that shapes not just careers, but entire industry directions." That evening, I found myself standing on my apartment balcony as sunset painted Seattle's skyline in gold and crimson. The offer represented professional advancement beyond what I had imagined possible at this stage of my career: greater impact, autonomy, and compensation. Yet my thoughts kept drifting to Oak Ridge, to the foundation taking shape there, and to an idea: That would have seemed absurd a year earlier. What if I established the new division in Oak Ridge? The concept initially seemed impractical. Oak Ridge was a small town without an established tech presence or obvious talent pool. Yet as I considered more deeply, potential advantages emerged. Lower operational costs compared to tech hubs like Seattle or San Francisco, potential for community revitalization through high-quality employment opportunities, proximity to the educational foundation, allowing for natural synergies between corporate innovation and community development. Most significantly, establishing a cutting-edge financial technology division in Oak Ridge would create a living example of the very principles the foundation sought to promote, demonstrating to local youth that innovation wasn't geographically restricted to major cities, that financial technology could emerge from any community with vision and determination. The more I considered this unconventional approach, the more compelling it became. It would require significant planning and initially higher recruitment costs to attract talent to a rural location. Yet the potential benefits, both professionally and for the Oak Ridge community, seemed worth the challenges. Before making any decisions, I needed perspectives beyond my own. I called my friend and mentor, Marcus, who had guided my early career, development, and consistently offered candid feedback. "It's audacious," he acknowledged after I outlined the concept. But audacity often precedes innovation. The question isn't whether it's conventional, it clearly isn't, but whether it's viable. What factors would determine viability? I asked, appreciating his analytical approach. 3 critical elements, he replied without hesitation. Infrastructure. Does Oak Ridge have the technological backbone to support sophisticated development? Work? Talent pipeline? Can you initially attract and eventually develop the necessary expertise? And quality of life. Does the location offer amenities that would retain professionals accustomed to urban environments? These questions provided a framework for evaluation rather than an immediate answer. Over the next few days, as I awaited the formal offer, I conducted thorough research into Oak Ridge's capabilities and limitations. The infrastructure question revealed surprising strengths. A regional fiber optic initiative had recently connected Oak Ridge to high-speed internet capabilities comparable to major cities. The County Economic Development Council had established tax incentives for technology businesses that would substantially reduce operational costs during the critical establishment phase. The talent pipeline presented greater challenges but not insurmountable ones. While Oak Ridge itself offered limited experienced tech professionals, it was within commuting distance of a mid-sized university with a respectable computer science program. Additionally, the growing trend toward remote work created possibilities for hybrid staffing models. Quality of life considerations varied by perspective. Oak Ridge couldn't offer urban amenities, but provided compensatory benefits, affordable housing that allowed for larger living spaces, outdoor recreation opportunities, and a close-knit community atmosphere increasingly valued by professionals seeking work-life balance. When the formal offer arrived, it confirmed Sophia's preview while adding substantial details about budget authority, equity compensation, and performance expectations. Most importantly, it explicitly stated leadership, discretion regarding division location, requiring only quarterly in-person presentations at corporate headquarters. This flexibility created the opening I needed. I requested a meeting with the CEO and executive committee, preparing a comprehensive proposal for establishing the division in Oak Ridge. The presentation addressed practical considerations like operational costs and talent acquisition strategies, while emphasizing alignment with the company's stated commitment to expanding financial accessibility beyond traditional urban centers. If we're serious about democratizing sophisticated financial tools, I concluded, shouldn't we demonstrate that commitment by developing those tools in the very communities they're designed to serve? The executive team's response surpassed my expectations. Rather than mere tolerance for an unconventional approach, they showed genuine enthusiasm for the concept's alignment with corporate social responsibility goals. The CEO particularly appreciated the potential for positive media coverage of a tech company investing in rural economic development, rather than concentrating resources in already prosperous urban centers. After extensive discussion and 2 follow-up meetings to address specific concerns, the executive committee approved my proposal with one significant modification. They increased the initial budget allocation to accommodate higher recruitment, costs and infrastructure investments necessary for the rural location. With corporate approval secured, my next step was exploring community receptiveness. I arranged a discreet meeting with Oak Ridge's mayor and economic development director, presenting the potential division establishment as a preliminary concept, requiring confidentiality until formally announced. Their response was immediate and enthusiastic. This would be transformative for our community, Mayor Richardson stated, her expression reflecting both excitement and thoughtful consideration. Beyond direct employment, the economic ripple effects would benefit everything from housing markets to local businesses. We've been trying to attract technology investment for years, added Development Director Patel. Having an established company choose Oak Ridge over traditional tech hubs would signal to other businesses that we're a viable location for innovation. Their support translated quickly into practical assistance, identifying potential office locations, connecting me with local contractors for renovation estimates, and expediting permit processes to accommodate our timeline. What might have taken months in a larger city was accomplished in weeks through the efficiency of small-town networks and genuine community investment in the project's success. Throughout this planning process, I maintained regular communication with Grandpa Walter, whose health had stabilized under the professional care arrangement. His reaction to the potential division establishment in Oak Ridge combined pride with practical wisdom. "The concept is sound," he acknowledged during one of our video calls, "but have you considered how returning to Oak Ridge might affect your personal boundaries? Proximity often complicates the maintenance of healthy limitations." This moment of quiet beauty confirmed that despite all logical arguments for my decision, there was also an emotional rightness to this homecoming that transcended professional strategy. My first week back involved a careful balance of professional preparation and family reintegration. Mornings were dedicated to overseeing final renovations at the office building, meeting with contractors about timeline adjustments, and virtual interviews with potential team members. Afternoons and evenings included measured family interactions, dinner with my parents, coffee with James to discuss potential insurance coverage for the new division, lunch with the twins to hear about their summer activities. Each interaction carried subtle tests of whether the boundaries I had established would hold despite geographic proximity. Would my parents begin dropping by unannounced, expecting unlimited access to my time and space? Would James gradually reintroduce financial discussions or expectations of assistance? Would family gatherings include assumptions about my availability that disregarded professional commitments? To my relief and mild surprise, the boundaries largely held firm. My parents called before visiting, respecting the separation between my home and theirs despite the short distance between them. James maintained focus on professional collaboration rather than personal financial matters when discussing potential business between his agency and my division. Family invitations came with the explicit acknowledgement that my schedule might not always accommodate them. This respect for boundaries wasn't universal or perfect. Aunt Patricia commented pointedly about my absence from a cousin's barbecue that conflicted with a critical vendor meeting, and Mom occasionally slipped into old patterns of asking me to run family errands that could easily have been handled by others. Yet these moments remained exceptions rather than establishing new patterns, and gentle reminders of my limitations were generally received without dramatic resistance. 10 days after my return, I received an unexpected visitor at my bungalow. The doorbell rang on a Saturday morning as I was reviewing applicant profiles for the division's developer positions. Opening the door revealed Grandpa Walter, standing independently with only the assistance of a sleek carbon fiber cane, a significant improvement from the walker he had been using during my Thanksgiving visit. "Grandpa, What a wonderful surprise, I said, genuinely delighted as I welcomed him inside. Thought I should see this place of yours, he replied, his eyes already taking in the details of my home with characteristic attention. Your father mentioned you've done some interesting things with the space. As I gave him a tour, I realized this was his first time visiting me in my own home, ever. During college and my early career, he had never traveled to see my apartments, or condos, maintaining that young people should visit their elders rather than expecting the reverse. This deviation from his usual practice represented both his improved mobility under professional care and perhaps a deeper acknowledgement of my adult independence. You've created something uniquely yours while honoring the home's history, he observed as we settled in the sunroom I had converted into a reading nook. Not erasing the past, but building thoughtfully upon it, much like what you're doing with the division and foundation. His perception, as always, cut directly to underlying patterns. I hadn't made that connection explicitly, but you're right. There's a similar philosophy at work. He nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. Now, tell me about these renovation challenges at the bank building. Your father mentioned something about unexpected structural issues. For the next hour, we discussed practical matters related to both the division establishment and foundation development, his business acumen providing valuable perspective despite his limited technical knowledge. As our conversation concluded, he fixed me with his direct gaze. You know the town's buzzing with speculation about what exactly you're establishing downtown. The secrecy has generated quite the rumor mill. I smiled, unsurprised. Small towns processed information through social networks rather than press releases. The official announcement comes next week. Until then, people can enjoy their theories. Some of those theories are quite creative, he noted with amusement. Everything from a spy agency outpost to an exclusive private club, though increasingly, people are connecting your return with something technology-related. They're not entirely wrong, I acknowledged, but the full concept goes beyond what most would guess. Because it's not just about technology or business, he suggested. It's about transformation of both opportunities and perceptions in communities like Oak Ridge. His understanding of my deeper motivation confirmed what I had always sensed, that beneath his sometimes stern exterior, Grandpa Walter possessed remarkable intuition about people's core values and intentions. Exactly, I confirmed. Technology companies don't have to be concentrated in major cities. Innovation can happen anywhere with the right infrastructure and talent, proving that here creates possibilities for other rural communities across the country. As he prepared to leave, supported by his caregiver who had waited discreetly in the car during our visit, he paused at the door. You're creating something significant, Rebecca. Not just professionally, but in how you've reshaped your place in this community, contributing without sacrificing yourself. That's a model worth establishing. His words carried the weight of both approval and challenge, acknowledgement of what I had already accomplished alongside expectations for what might still be created. This balanced perspective had characterized his influence throughout my life, though I had only recently developed the maturity to fully appreciate it. The following week brought the official public announcement of Financial Frontier Technologies, the division's formal name, establishing its headquarters in Oak Ridge. The company issued a press release emphasizing the strategic advantages of rural development and commitment to expanding financial technology access beyond traditional urban centers. Local media coverage focused on economic impact, projected job creation, increased tax base, and potential revitalization of downtown business activity. The community reaction exceeded even my optimistic expectations. The Chamber of Commerce organized a welcome reception at the recently renovated historic theater, where nearly 300 residents gathered to learn more about the division's plans. Standing on the stage where I had once performed in my high school production of Our Town, I presented our vision for developing platforms that would democratize sophisticated financial tools. Financial technology shouldn't be limited to those already connected to wealth and power, I explained to the attentive audience. Our mission is creating intuitive interfaces that make complex financial capabilities accessible to everyone, from rural entrepreneurs to urban communities historically excluded from traditional banking systems. The enthusiastic response reflected more than mere appreciation for economic opportunity. It suggested genuine alignment with the vision itself, recognition that Oak Ridge could participate in innovation with social purpose rather than merely hosting corporate operations. Following the presentation, community members approached with questions, suggestions, and offers of assistance that reflected thoughtful engagement rather than passive acceptance. Local educators proposed internship frameworks for high school students interested in technology careers. Small business owners suggested partnerships that could provide both services to our team and testing grounds for our developing platforms. Even the town's most notorious skeptic, Harold Jenkins, whose letters to the editor reliably criticized every new initiative, acknowledged that, while questions remain, the concept appears to offer genuine benefit beyond corporate profit. This community reception reinforced the potential synergy between the division and the educational foundation. By establishing a visible technology operation in Oak Ridge, we created tangible evidence that financial innovation wasn't geographically restricted to coastal cities, that young people could pursue technology careers without automatically leaving their hometown. The Foundation's initial programs would launch in October, beginning with after-school workshops for high school students interested in financial technology concepts. These sessions would be conducted by division team members, creating direct connections between professional practitioners and local youth. The model embodied Grandpa Walter's philosophy of empowerment through both education and example, providing knowledge alongside visible proof of its practical application. As summer transitioned to early fall, the division headquarters neared completion. The renovation had preserved the former bank's architectural integrity, maintaining the grand marble columns flanking the entrance and restoring the ornate plaster ceiling, while creating a modern workplace within this historic envelope. The symbolic resonance of establishing financial technology, innovation within a traditional banking structure, perfectly aligned with our mission of modernizing access to financial capabilities. The timing proved fortuitous for recruitment efforts as well. Several highly qualified developers from major tech companies had become disillusioned with deteriorating quality of life in traditional tech hubs, skyrocketing housing costs, hours-long commutes, and work cultures that claimed to value balance while implicitly rewarding overwork. Our commitment to maintaining reasonable hours, fair compensation, and genuine work-life integration attracted experienced professionals seeking meaningful work without lifestyle sacrifice. By mid-September, we had assembled our core team, 12 professionals representing diverse backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives. Some relocated to Oak Ridge, attracted by affordable housing and proximity to outdoor recreation. Others adopted hybrid arrangements, spending part of each month on-site while working remotely during intervening weeks. This flexible approach allowed us to access talent regardless of geographic constraints while maintaining sufficient in-person collaboration for effective team cohesion. The weekend before our official opening, I hosted a team gathering at my bungalow, an informal opportunity for everyone to connect outside the workplace environment. As team members and their families mingled in my backyard, I found myself in conversation with our senior developer, Aisha, who had relocated from Silicon Valley with her husband and 2 children. "We've only been here 3 weeks," she said, watching her children playing comfortable with their new friends. "But it already feels more like home than our apartment complex in San Jose ever did. Yesterday, our neighbor brought over homemade bread just to welcome us. That kind of human connection had become almost foreign to us." Her observation highlighted benefits beyond cost-effectiveness or work-life balance. The community integration often missing in transient tech hubs where neighbors remained strangers despite physical proximity. Here, team members weren't just employees but community members, creating foundations for both personal satisfaction and professional retention. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.